Okay, cool. Get the Zoom window out of the way, bear with me. Okay, cool. Has that come through okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, still getting over the cold flu weird thing I've got, so you'll have to deal with a bit of robot voice, but hopefully I'll get through this without any coughing. So I wanted to do a recap on what the usability team's been up to in Q2. So we've been kicking off some usability sessions with customers. So back in Q1, we had an idea to start running through some customer scenarios, basically trying to compare and contrast V3 versus V4, try and figure out what were the differences. Basically because, yeah, most of you would have heard me complaining about the expanders, and I wasn't sold on the new design yet, but at the same time, I didn't have any answers. Like, I couldn't tell you why. I knew that it didn't feel right at the time. And so this was sort of a quest for getting some feedback from customers as well, to see if anyone else felt the same way and if we could get to the answer of why. But essentially at this point, I'm just some old dude that's complaining about stuff, right? I've just got a feeling that things have been nagging at me for months, but I wanted to figure out what's going on. And interestingly, customers started telling us the same things when we asked them, you know, what they improved. They'd say things like, I'm not sure, I don't like these expanders, but I don't know why they bug me. And when we push them, they'd also say, look, I don't know what you could do to improve them. They just, which is really frustrating in and of itself, right? It's kind of like someone saying, I don't like the look of your face, but I can't tell you why. It's like, awesome. So at this point, we had a collection of opinions that we could start to see some patterns. The pattern was there's some frustration going on with customers. Not always. We had a lot of good feedback as well. Some people said they love it. We had some negative stuff. A lot of people complaining about the white space. One of my favorite was someone saying the whole UI is like a kindergarten now. Everything's so huge. That's because of the whole material UI Google thing being 16 pixels, and they were just freaking out about that. We had a lot of people saying, you know, you moved cheese, but I guess it's okay and I'll get used to it. And then we had the other people that were like, no, you move my cheese, move it back now. So it was interesting seeing all these things coming in from support and other areas. And again, this sort of theme that it's okay, but something doesn't feel right. So in usability, we're trying to get a better idea of what's going on. I pulled this one in as well because this was one of my favorites. So we started getting support tickets like this, and this wasn't the only one. This was just a standout. And I don't know about you, but when I'm reading support tickets like this that are just negative, my first impression is like, well, it's disappointment, but as well, it's like, oh, if you're going to talk to us like that, you know, back of the line for you, buddy. But it was kind of like the rest of the language in the ticket that caught my eye and kept me reading in this case, because they'd taken the time to list out some very specific frustrations. And to be fair, they prefixed all of this with, you know, bear in mind, with all of his ranting below, he said that he loves the product in general, but they just got some daily frustrations that are making them, you know, really angry every single day. My perspective from this was, you know, if you've had one customer who's taken the time to write all these things down in detail and vent their frustrations, there's probably another 10 people that are feeling exactly the same way who haven't bothered to report it, right? Because they're lazy or because they don't think it'll make it a difference, so they don't bother. But that's generally a statistic I try and live by. Like, if someone's taken the time to submit a support request, take it really seriously, because there's probably more who are feeling exactly the same way. So yeah, the people who do submit the support requests are the ones who bothered, right? So yeah, it's really cool to pay attention to them. And taking a page out of Paul's book, it's also a great chance to see if we can learn from their frustrations and turn the situation around into a positive relationship. So at this point, I'm also asking myself, you know, I'm still using V3 myself in my personal projects. Why am I doing that? And, you know, initially I said to myself, you know, I've got no reason to upgrade it. V3 does everything that I need. And for a long time, version 2.65, I think it was, did everything I needed as well. But I thought, hang on, no, that's a bit of a cop-out. Like, I know there's a heap of improvements in the UX and the performance. So these are things that I care about, right? Why am I not upgrading? And then it sort of hit me. It's because the V4 made the UX slower for me to do data entry. Like I'm a user who likes to quickly add a project, add a script, add a package, create a release, hit next, 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 and I'm done. And I want that process to be really, really fast. And so once I figured this out, it's like, this is also the reason I've been hating on the expanders. Because we do expanders differently in the steps compared to every other place in Octopus UI. It didn't make sense because the bulk of the step, the important bits, they were collapsed. So I had to open every expander to enter the data that I wanted, even for simple things like a package or a script step. And the script step drove me crazy because I'd constantly expand the script source by accident first, and then I'd have to go, oh no, I want the script content. And the same with packages. And we saw customers do this so many times. I'm adding a step specifically designed to add a package, and yet the field I need to upload a package is collapsed, and you're forcing me to expand it every single time. So at this point I'm just raging. And so Octopus is no longer getting out of my way to enter data really quickly. And another thing we noticed with V3 versus V4 is, V3 used to redirect back to the list on save. So I've just finished adding a step. 9 times out of 10, at this point, I want to add another step. And we saw customers stumble over this time and time again in our customer sessions as well. They'd get to the point where, okay, I'll save the step. And then they sort of stumble a little bit and go, wait, where do I go back now to add another step? Oh, I've got to click this little breadcrumb menu thing. That didn't happen in V3. And so in V3, it's causing me to stumble momentarily. It's causing me to pause. It's causing me to stop my process of entering data really quickly. So at this point, this is good. I know why. I love both V4 and V3, but I now know why V3 was still my preference for all this time. And so what I want to start to do is start combining what is awesome about both. But before I can do that, I need proof that this is actually a problem, right? Are customers feeling this as well? Can we observe customers going through the same thing? Or is this just my preference? So at this point, we've got support tickets of people complaining. We've got a scattering of user voice and some opinions. So we need some lab rats. And it was a perfect time as the hosted team was doing wanting some alpha testing of their registration process. So enter Jess. So at this point, this is sort of early Q2, and I started to get consumed by the Azure targets work. So while Ben and I were busy, crying ourselves to sleep every night on Azure targets, Jess took the bull by the horns in discussion with Team Hosted and started arranging some process that we could use to start capturing this data from a customer perspective for the customer sessions. So Jess is going to talk more about that process, so I won't touch too much on that. But the cool thing was this allowed us to get more quality feedback about how people are using Octopus, both new customers and existing customers, and what their frustrations are along the way. Okay, so I just pulled out some of the sort of many points that we observed along the way. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these were just some of the highlights that I thought were really cool. New customers were very confused about, the terminology of tentacle and calamari. It really confused them and sort of stopped them in their tracks. And they're like, I don't know what this is. What do I do here? And interestingly enough, they also seemed absolutely blind to our external help links on some of these screens. So they're trying to figure out how do they set up a new deployment target, and we're showing them terminology that's really confusing to them, and the help link's all the way at the bottom and they don't even see it. So they're kind of just stuck there feeling really frustrated, and they're feeling stupid, right? Which is a really bad thing. And yeah, if we want to try and stop that, so that's all being redesigned. We had multiple people doing IAS steps, and I felt so bad for some dude. So we're watching him set up this IAS step, right? And he skipped over the role selection for whatever reason, and he started filling out his IAS step. There's all these sections, so he's expanding each one, filling them out. And then he scrolls back up and realized that he hasn't specified the role. And not only that he hasn't actually set up his infrastructure yet. So he has to abandon the step, go set up his infrastructure, set up his machine, set up his role, then go back in. And at this point, he's raging. He's like, why are you making me expand all these frigging things? I have to open every single one for IAS steps. Why are you making me do this? And that was really cool. one thing, this was amazing. So this was some feedback from the Ukrainian customer that we were looking at. We're asking him, you know, what did he feel like about, because he was a long time user, he'd been using V3, and he said, you know, V4 is it's okay, but it's kind of like the new Swagger UI. I'm like, the new Swagger UI? That's really, because I hadn't seen this yet. I'd still been using the old one personally. And he said, yeah, you look at the new one versus the old one, and he pulled them up side by side, and he said, see, this is the old Swagger UI. It's got a simple button. It looks like a button. Simple input boxes look like input box. But the new one, it's all this fancy material UI. Like, how do I even know this is a button? It's just got a different background color. Like, they're making it harder for me to get where I need to go. This is no longer intuitive. And I was like, and he's like, this is exactly how I feel about new Octopus now. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's a interesting way to look at it. But it was a really good comparison, I thought. Shane, you'll be interested in this one. This came up a couple of times, actually. People were talking about the dashboards. It's like, we have multiple dashboards. Why? We don't need them. I never use this main one. Show me something useful here instead. I thought that was really cool. There's been talk also about reimagining the dashboard. So we will be doing, you know, planning to do something about this, maybe kick off a feature team in Q3 or Q4 to try and get the dashboard maybe showing some reports or statistics, or something like the infrastructure dashboard where it's, you know, summary information, just something that's not the same thing. So yeah, there's that. This thing came up, so they were comparing us to Team City. So a lot of people were using template projects. Okay, so they set up a whole bunch of projects that are purely just template, and then when a new team comes along, they just clone those projects. And they wanted a way of changing root properties across all of their cloned projects. They also wanted to know which project was their project originally cloned from, so they could, you know, figure out any little mistakes and fix them in the root project. So I thought that was really interesting. And they said they can do this in Team City. They'd love a similar thing that they can do in Octopus. People saying the variable screen was strange because of the virtual scrolling. So they were typically used to just, you know, it's natural for them to go Control F and start searching for things, but you can't do that when you've got virtual scrolling enabled. And this guy was complaining because, you know, they typically just have 50 or so variables. They don't have hundreds or thousands that need virtual scrolling. So he's saying, why are you forcing virtual scrolling on me when I don't need it? It's pain. So this is, again, comes down to the scale debate. You know, do you design for scale, or do you design for people who aren't at scale? Do you try and find something in the middle? Do you cater for both? It's an interesting question. And it's one of those things you're going to get frustrations if you choose one way or the other, right? This was about our release and deployment screen process. I found this really interesting. He said that, you know, engineers are only careful on this screen when they're deploying to production. Otherwise, they're basically blind and just going next, next, next to get it through as fast as possible. He says, but after a while, just hitting next, next, next all the time feels monotonous. He wanted like a deploy now button, or a button that just bypassed all of that, so they can just say, yes, deploy it to the next environment, go. Don't ask me questions. Oh yeah, this came up so many times, and we know about it. We've got a card and we're fixing it. Updating the variable snapshots drives me crazy, he says. And we've had this as internal feedback as well. You know, why not just give me a button where that warning shows up about updating my snapshot, rather than go through all that pain? So that was, yeah, that one hit home, because it's hidden away. You've got to click this like show details button to get to it. You're forcing the user through so many clicks. It's just a nightmare for them. This was an interesting one. So in V3, we used to have the configure features button in line, and then we moved it up to the top because we wanted consistency in where our buttons were, and we thought that would make it, you know, consistency is better, but it's not more intuitive. This person was saying, you know, they're training different groups of Octopus users because they're onboarding more and more teams and more projects into Octopus. And they're constantly telling them where to find configure features, because it's not where they're looking when they want to find configure features. And we actually moved this into the last release before we did our last customer session. And it was really cool to watch, because the guy setting up I think it was another guy using IIS steps, and he gets to the bottom and he just clicked the configure features right where it was in line. And I was like, wow, it was really cool just seeing that feedback straight away. It's like, yep, done. So in that case, we've kept the configure features button up, so you've got your consistency of your button placement. But in this case, we've also put one in line so that there's an option for people who are just doing things intuitively in form. So in a wrap up, there's a lot of love for the Octopus and the new UI, but we've also got obviously a bit of room to improve. And for me, I guess it's the little things like this configure features button being in the right place that makes the biggest difference for customers, because if it's not there, they get stuck. Like we had a session, I think it was about 3 back, where we had the same thing. He needed to configure, you know, the deployment script step stuff, and he couldn't find it. He could not find the configure features button. And he's like, oh, I know it's here somewhere. It's called configure features. And we're watching his mouse cursor go all over the screen. And I swear, he even actually moused over the configure features button itself, but he just seemed blind to it. He could not see it there. It was insane. And it's like, it just wasn't where he expected. And we saw the same thing with the hosted registration process. That was crazy. Like they were going through the process of registering, and you know, you first register for your Octopus account manager account, and then you've got to set up your instance. And after you've set up your instance, you've got to go and set up your first user, right? And so on the landing screen, we've got this massive green box that says, set up your first user, click here sort of thing. It's like, we couldn't make it any more obvious. And yet we're seeing users time and time again, just mouse over that, and they didn't see it at all because they thought that the user had already been set up, so they didn't need to do anything. And then when you pointed it out to them that, oh, it's the really big green box there, you need to click that button, they felt really stupid, like, oh, whoops. So yeah, it's little things like that that I thought were really interesting. So we've been improving consistency, but yeah, we haven't been doing so well at making things intuitive along the way. It's kind of like when you're adding your first project, right? We used to give you a single green action saying, hey, you need to set up your deployment process. You'd click that, and then we'd have a single clear action saying, hey, you need to add a step. So it was teaching you in a very simple way, whereas now there's so much noise for your brain to take in during onboarding. You've got multiple columns of images and descriptions thrown in your face to read. It's essentially distracting and leads to a UX that's no longer intuitive. So we've also been having users sending us videos where they've hacked our CSS to make all the dark blue buttons green again, because they naturally grab your attention more easily. And apparently our customers just don't like the dark blue buttons, which I found really fascinating. So yeah, as part of the usability sessions, we're working on just bringing that balance back and seeing things through the customer's eyes. So what did we learn from all of this? Well, the customer feedback sessions in just, 1 quarter has been extremely valuable. We definitely love to see more of the company shift towards testing with customers in like this observing only mode, or A/B testing to continuously improve the product. But on that topic, just observing is really hard to do. The amount of times that Jess and I just wanted to jump in and help them it's so hard. You've got to sit on your hands and just not say anything as you watch them fail time and time again, because you can't guide or lead the user in any way, which in my opinion, engineers are notorious for doing, and consultants as well, right? Like as engineers and consultants, you just want to jump in and help them and say, no, just click here, just do this thing. It's up there, don't you see it? But you can't do that. You've got to watch them fail and just stay quiet and see how long it takes them to figure it out, essentially. What I observe from this is they will be frustrated and they will ask for help early. Like as soon as they hit any problem, they'll be like, oh, what do I do? And you got to stay dead quiet. And they're like, can you help me? And you got to say, you've actually got to come out and say, I can't actually help you here. We've got to see whether you can figure it out. And they go, and that's when they start to go into problem solving mode. Excuse me. So it's kind of like that mean parent mentality, right? Where your kid's asking you for something and you just got to be quiet because you want to see if they can figure out the problem. Like you've locked your kid in a cage, but there's a key in the cage and the kid can get out, but the kid's just staring at you saying, can you let me out of the cage? And you got to just sit there saying, nope, can't help you, and see how long it takes for them to figure it out. We went through so many moments like that in this usability testing. It was hilarious. So you've essentially got to know where the line is. When are they really stuck? And yeah, that's all I have. thanks for listening. And yeah, hopefully that gives you some insights into what we're doing in usability. If there's any questions or comments, please drop us a line in the usability channel. That's all from me.
I think I was next.
Cool. Jess,
What was Jess?
I think I'm there.
she wanted to follow after mine.
No, go for it.
Mine kind of follows on nicely from that. So I'm just going to talk about the details of the session and how we organised it, and then also some results about the hosted stuff and what we found. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Cool. So let's go back. So one of the OKRs for the usability team that Mark and I made for ourselves is to do testing every month. And so for June, it was hosted registration and onboarding as well, because we want to improve the onboarding experience for new users so we can get obviously more sales and so on. So just some numbers. We only got 3 new users accepting the request for testing, and 5 existing users as well. But the existing users were really interesting to watch. They did probably slightly more complex deployments, and we were able to pick up on different things like the offline package drop. File paths didn't really make sense in the cloud, so I think the hosted team were frantically looking at that. And the new users, we really only got 2 successful sessions out of that, because one of them, the instance didn't spin up and he was asking more questions, and yeah, it wasn't very useful for us. So what we actually did, and that we found worked really well, is having 2 people in the session. So one was the host, and Mark and I alternated that, and the host would ask all the questions, and the other person would just capture observations and feedback in a spreadsheet. So we only asked them 2 questions in this session. Normally you would ask them a lot more, but we just 2 questions. First one was register for hosted, and the second one was create your first deployment. During the session, we used the polling tool in Zoom. I don't know if anybody's used it, but you can set up a poll and display it on the user's screen, and they just click on the radio buttons to answer. So the poll was, how did you perceive the difficulty of the task that you just created, or that you just did? And it was 1 for extremely easy and 5 for extremely difficult. And that just helped us gauge what they really thought, because what they were saying was like, or what we saw them do was struggle, but then they would say, oh no, that was really easy. So in their mind, they're thinking, oh, filling out a form's easy to do, but the experience and actually understanding it was a challenge for them in some areas. And then at the end, we did a post-session survey, but not everybody filled it out. I think out of the 8 people, we had 4 people fill it out, but got some good responses. And then we also recorded each session as well. So if you ever want to see any of the sessions, let us know, and we can share that with you. So these are the results of the perceived difficulty. We rated the perceived difficulty of the tasks ourselves, and then this column here is the median of what they rated it. So as you can see, 3 for locating the instance and logging into hosted was a challenge, and I'll talk about that later. And creating a deployment target was also a sticking point. As Mark said, it was a terminology that people got stuck on. They also got stuck when they were doing polling tentacles. They had no idea what to do. It's like a dead end. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know if the polling tentacle would show up automatically. So we're going to look at that to improve the experience there. So we got about 50 pieces of feedback throughout those 8 sessions. And we noticed some pretty strong themes come through. Some of those pieces of feedback we're addressing, some of them we're just prioritizing, some we won't really worry about. But it was a lot. But the biggest theme was the hosted sign-in was confusing. The deployment target page was confusing, and adding a new role was also a sticking point. So let's talk about the hosted registration user journey. So we sent them a link to this page, and the task was register for hosted. So nothing about creating an instance, so no leading words here, it was just register for hosted. And they obviously hit with this page of who is this instance for. So they put in their details, they go to this who are you page. We preempted this before we did the testing with, we think this might be a little bit confusing. So we added this line here to say, these contact details that you're going to fill out, this will actually be your login details for your Octopus account manager. And then they go on to confirmation for the instance details. And then they get this button, looks good, deploy my Octopus. So there's actually nothing on there that says that they're registering for hosted, which was confusing. So we sat there for 5 to 10 minutes with them. We just asked them questions about what kind of applications they deploy, what source control they use, and so on. So it was really good to find out about these users. And then this page automatically refreshes when the instance is ready to the license details page for that instance. This is the green button that Mark was talking about before, where we preempted this again with, we don't think it's clear of the next step. So we put this green button here, but they didn't see it. Most of them actually clicked on this link here to go to their instance. And then when they went to the instance, they went to the login page and they logged in with the credentials that they just created for the Octopus account manager. And obviously they got, these details aren't correct. So then we asked them, what do you think the credentials that you just created were for? And they all said for the instance. So the biggest thing that's come out of this user testing is that we need to clarify this process a lot better. And one of the ideas was to just use those credentials for the instance, but there's issues around that with encryption. And so we have some other ideas of how we can actually separate these two processes out to make it clearer for the users. And so what's next? So July usability testing is spaces and workers. So workers, I think, will be released before we do the usability testing, but that's okay. We'll just include that in the process. And then some projects we'd like to do for Q3 is improving the deployment target setup. We already have some prototypes that we've done. So we'll probably share that with you in the next couple of weeks to get some internal feedback. And then we'll also do some more usability testing on that, probably via a Slack channel in the community Slack. We want to make the add role action more intuitive, and then we want to simplify the onboarding, because we did notice that people would kind of, I think one person really read the onboarding stuff, some people skimmed it, but it was kind of like this wall of text for people. And in the post survey, a lot of them said, well, 50% said a guided tour would be helpful. One person said, don't change anything, it's fine. And then another person had a custom answer, which I can't quite recall what that was. So that's it for the results of June's testing session. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Actually, maybe just one, probably more for Mark than Jess, but
Yep.
do you have plans for providing help for odd terms? Polling, technical, whatever.
Sorry, say that again.
So Mark mentioned that some of the users were hung up on terms and they weren't viewing or they weren't seeing the help text.
Yeah, one interesting thing from that. So when this guy was confused about what's a polling tentacle versus a listening tentacle, he kept saying that, oh, there's some image that explains it all, but I can't find it. And eventually I led him to, there's the doc link down the bottom of this list, dude. And he's like, oh, cool. And he clicked that. And he's like, oh, but that's just a wall of text. That doesn't help me. I was like, you're seriously not going to take the time to read just a couple of paragraphs? Like, what the hell, dude? And then he actually stumbled across it. He's like, oh, it's that image in the tentacle manager when you're setting up the tentacle, because he had to go in and set one up. And he's like, this is the image. If you put this directly in the UI, this would help me. The image that actually shows you the difference between the way the communication works. So Jess is looking at redesigning that entire screen to make it more intuitive about which options you get. But I think we do need to consider bringing in some of those conceptual images either directly into the docs. Like, I know we don't want more screenshots in docs because they get out of date, but if we could get some of those conceptual images, that would really help customers.
All right.
Yeah, and that's definitely the plan with this new design. It'll give us more space to bring in graphics that can illustrate what polling and listening tentacle is.
Do you see that as a common theme? Because we're going to run into this with Kubernetes. They have so many terms that make no sense unless you already know them.
Yeah, my other concern is that we're introducing the concept of worker pools and workers into, an area of infrastructure where people are already confused about what's a deployment target, what's a tentacle. So I think we need a way of being very, we may need to introduce a paragraph of text up the top or something that just clearly discusses what each of these things is in a very concise way. Because I'm worried we're going to add too much noise there and people are just going to get more confused.
So you would see it valid as just putting text on the page then, like paragraphs?
Not paragraphs, but a very concise thing about this is what a deployment target is versus this is what a worker is versus this is what a worker pool is. If we can find a way of wording that very succinctly and maybe have a link to documentation for more detail. But I think we need at least that. Well, we can't just have, worker pools and workers and then just our list. We need some context for people to read directly in the UI. Because they're stumbling around at the moment and we've seen them stumbling to the point where we had to intervene and help them and show them what to do.
Yeah, we want them to find the happy path first, not get confused. And when we have too much on screen and they're asking questions, that it kind of indicates that something we don't quite have it right.
Yeah, and I don't think we need to have this everywhere. It's only in the places where it's not intuitive. It's not intuitive what a deployment target is. It's not intuitive what a tentacle is. It's not intuitive what a worker or worker pool is. When would I choose a worker over a deployment target? To me, a worker is a thing that would do work. Why can't I just use that? Oh, it's different to a deployment target. Okay. No, it's the same. Oh, explain the differences. Yeah. So that as a user, when I'm navigating around, I can, you get the idea.